Imagine growing up in a country where a brutal, unspeakable chapter of your own history is completely erased from the textbooks, where your grandparents whisper stories but stop cold if a stranger gets too close, where an entire generation was slaughtered, but the official line calls them traitors, and the perpetrators are celebrated as heroes. That's the reality for millions in Indonesia. In 1965, on a single terrifying night, 6 top generals and an army lieutenant were murdered. What followed was a purge that killed over 500,000 people, maybe even 1 million. But the true horror isn't just the death toll, it's the decades of enforced silence that followed. And here's why that silence is so profound. Newly declassified documents suggest this wasn't just a homegrown tragedy. It was a crisis strategically facilitated by powerful foreign interests, whose involvement helped lock that silence into place. Let's wind back to Indonesia, 1965. The Cold War is absolutely raging. President Suharto, a fiercely independent leader, refuses to align with either the U.S. or the Soviet Union. His vision for Indonesia was called Nasacom: nationalism, religion, and communism. A balancing act he believed was essential for unity. He famously kept Western powers at arm's length, and crucially, he refused to outlaw the Communist Party. Now, the PKI, the Indonesian Communist Party, was massive. I mean, truly unprecedented. We're talking over 3 million members, making it the largest non-ruling communist party in the world. And if you include their affiliated youth, labor, and women's organizations, it was tens of millions of people. In Washington, D.C., the fear was palpable. The domino theory was gospel. China had fallen in 49. Vietnam was going south. And Indonesia, with its vast population, strategic position controlling vital shipping lanes, and incredible natural resources like oil, tin, and rubber. The idea of it falling to communism was a Cold War nightmare they simply couldn't tolerate. So, enter General Suharto. He was a different breed, pragmatic, staunchly anti-communist, and crucially, he'd built connections with the U.S. He'd gone through U.S.-sponsored military training programs, used their equipment. He was seen as their guy, a potential ally in a critical region. He quietly built influence, biding his time, waiting for an opportunity. And that opportunity arrived, brutally, on the night of September 30th, 1965. Just after 3 a.m., armed soldiers, calling themselves the 30th September Movement, swept through Jakarta, abducting top generals from their homes. 6 generals and 1 army lieutenant were murdered, their bodies later found brutally disposed of in a well at Lubang Buaya. The official narrative came fast and hard, a failed communist coup by the PKI. Suharto, untouched, untargeted, swiftly moved to restore order. But even then, in the immediate aftermath, there were whispers, questions that hung in the air. Why only target the staunchly anti-communist generals? Why did this supposed coup collapse almost instantly? And how was Suharto, the one who so dramatically benefited, not on any hit list? Historians today are still debating the exact origins of the G30S movement. Was it internal military factions? A desperate rogue element within the PKI? A fatal miscalculation? What's undeniable, however, is what happened next. Within days, Suharto launched a crackdown that was swift, brutal, and systematic, and it would usher in half a century of fear. Now, let's talk about the outside forces that not only watched, but actively contributed to the ensuing horror and the decades of silence. Marshall Green, the U.S. ambassador to Indonesia, sent telegrams back to Washington that are chillingly direct. He wasn't suggesting an investigation. He was calling for the spreading of the PKI's guilt. He was pushing a narrative, not seeking truth. Then there's Robert Martins, a political officer at the U.S. Embassy. His role was even more direct. He compiled lists of PKI members, thousands of names. These lists were then handed directly to the Indonesian military. Years later, Martins himself confessed, "They probably killed a lot of people. I probably have a lot of blood on my hands." Imagine living with that. Hugh Tovar, the CIA station chief, was overseeing these operations, working hand in glove with the army. The U.S. Embassy's internal reports reflected outright satisfaction. They noted the purge was a success, and incredibly, that it occurred without any loss of U.S. prestige. It was a victory, no matter the human cost, and the British were right there. Their diplomat, Sir Andrew Gilchrist, chillingly wrote that Indonesia simply needed a little shooting. A little shooting. This wasn't some chance alignment of interests. This was active coordination, a campaign of political annihilation, greenlit by foreign powers and enabled with critical information, laying the groundwork for a long national trauma. The evidence isn't hidden anymore. The declassified documents are public. A 1965 U.S. cable details covert American support for anti-PKI propaganda, funding radio, print, film. American officials pushed stories that painted the army as national saviors and the communists as utterly demonic butchers. This wasn't just about suppressing a political party. It was about creating a mythology that would justify mass murder and enable collective amnesia. A 1968 CIA report, The Indonesian Coup of 1965, openly admits close contact with Indonesian military leaders during the purge, and then, with almost clinical detachment, concludes that Suharto's rise aligned with U.S. objectives. It was never about Indonesian freedom. It was about American interests, secured through horrific means. And this wasn't an anomaly. We've seen this playbook before. Iran in 1953, Guatemala in 1954, Congo in 1961, Chile in 1973. The formula was consistent: destabilize, isolate, and replace a leader with someone friendly to Western interests. But Indonesia, with its scale of violence and the subsequent decades of official denial, it became the chilling blueprint for how to bury a truth. The killings themselves were beyond brutal. They weren't just targeted assassinations. They were widespread massacres carried out with terrifying abandon, by riverbanks, in rice fields, inside schoolyards. Victims weren't just PKI members. They were teachers, unionists, artists, farmers, anyone with a rumor against them, anyone who looked wrong, anyone from the wrong ethnic group. Children died because their parents had the wrong last name. Women were raped before execution. A British officer, horrified, cabled home that Indonesia was killing with a thoroughness that would make even the Nazis blush. And what was the American reaction to this chilling efficiency? A 1966 CIA memo didn't condemn it. It hailed the destruction of the PKI as one of the most important events in Asia and explicitly saw it as a template for future operations. They turned genocide into a lesson plan. When the blood finally dried, Suharto was firmly in power. And what about the Western corporations that Sukarno had kept out? They flooded in. ExxonMobil, Freeport, General Motors. Indonesia's vast resources suddenly became wide open for business. But the real cost, not just the lives lost, but the profound intergenerational trauma that lives on. Unlike Vietnam, there were no American body bags from Indonesia, no protests on U.S. campuses, no front-page exposés in the New York Times. This was a war by proxy, efficient, deniable, and ruthlessly effective, designed to leave minimal public trace. And for decades, it worked. Even today in Indonesia, the shadow remains. Survivors still live in fear. Families of victims carry a deep, isolating stigma. School textbooks still teach a sanitized version, painting Suharto as a national hero who saved the country from evil communists. The truth has been buried under layers of fear and propaganda. But you know what doesn't lie? The riverbanks in central Java, where the bodies piled up, the empty houses in Bali, the broken families across every island, the silent, haunted eyes of the survivors. And increasingly, the new generation of Indonesians is starting to ask questions. They're seeking out the hidden stories, finding the declassified documents, and demanding to know the truth. They're refusing to let the silence continue. This isn't just about a historical event. This is about the enduring legacy of trauma, the power of state-enforced amnesia, and the bravery of those who fight for memory against overwhelming odds. So, as we unravel these threads, we have to ask the hard questions. How does a society heal when its deepest wounds are denied and silenced for half a century? What is the cost of stability when it's built on a mountain of lies and mass graves? And when foreign powers actively enable such atrocities and then benefit from the outcome, what responsibility do they bear for the intergenerational trauma that continues to plague a nation? This story isn't just about the CIA. It's about the invisible scars left by global power plays and the ongoing struggle for truth in the face of overwhelming pressure to forget. The evidence is public. The outcomes are undeniable. What happened in Indonesia wasn't just Cold War strategy. It was a human tragedy written with foreign ink and signed in blood, then erased from the official record. The CIA didn't pull the triggers, no, but they passed the ammunition, literally and metaphorically, and helped create the very conditions for the decades of silence that followed. This wasn't just Indonesia's darkest night. It was a night of profound human cost, whose shadows still stretch across families and communities today. And it's a powerful reminder of what happens when the truth is buried, and why the fight for memory matters so much.